At the end of the exceptionally hot summer of 1949, a concert being held in the city of Peekskill, New York, erupted into a riot. The people, who had come out to see a performance by the black singer Paul Robeson, would find themselves at odds against an angry crowd of anti-civil rights protesters and white supremacists. In the course of the riot, spurred on by police inaction, over 140 people were injured. Among them, attacked by police and protesters alike, was Eugene Bullard. During the First Great War, Bullard had served with the French Foreign Legion, fought at the Battle of Verdun, and was awarded the Military Cross for his bravery. He then joined the French Air Service to become the world's first black military pilot. Later, he would serve as a crucial spy for the Allied forces during the Second World War. That's him on the ground, being beaten by his own countrymen.
My name is retired Corporal Larry Bryan. I was with the Reserve Battalion, Regiment Reserve, out of Cornwall, Ontario, Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry Highlanders. Well, the war started in 1914, and throughout the battles, eventually trench warfare came into play, and it was a stalemate. So the Germans had to find a weak spot someplace in the Western Front line, and they chose Verdun. The Germans had massed millions of shells, hundreds of thousands of men, 50 divisions in fact, to try to surprise the French. The battle was called the Judgment. The French would defend it with all expectations to the last man. It was a very strategic place for them, a very moral place for them, a very unique and special place for them, and they would defend it to the last man. Well, being in the French Legion and being a foreigner in the French Legion, they were much stricter on their soldiers. The discipline was more intense. If they messed up, they would incur disciplinary action immediately. But in order to get French citizenship, you had to fight in the Foreign Legion. His position as a gunner would have been 3 men in a position protecting, flanking trench lines full of Allied soldiers. They would have fortified the positions. They would have been responsible for taking care of their equipment, loading their ammunition, so on and so forth. Usually a 3-man crew would be a spotter, a loader, and a gunner. And each man would know each one's position. Well, in the, I should say in the United Kingdom, we have what they call a military cross. And this military cross, the French de Guerre, was very similar. It was usually awarded for valor. Eugene probably was awarded, I know he was awarded, because not only was he relaying the information, he stalled and helped a trench system fight back where he was severely wounded. The training, depending on how well they learned. There was a lot of ground training, a lot of tactical training, you know, on the board in school classes. They made mock-up cockpits where they taught them how to use the pedals, and they would move the aircraft in accordance to what he was doing with the stick to give them the feel for what the aircraft would do. When it come to tactics of fighting, they would teach them how to lead a target. You know, because in trench warfare, you didn't lead targets, you shot at your targets. In the beginning, when they gave them, they probably trained in trainers first to learn how to fly. Eventually, when he got into his missions, it would be reconnaissance, it would be support missions for the bombers. He didn't so much get into the air combat unless they were challenged. But eventually what it became was search and destroy. He would have been responsible for either being high air cover in one of the missions he was, and his responsibility was to watch out for enemy squadrons that were flying above the French squadrons, because it was a search and destroy. So they looked after each other, it was about annihilation. It was about taking their best pilots out so they couldn't train the next pilots. Whoever had the edge was getting the most kills. French pilots were lucky if they survived a week, especially if they were new, because of the tactics. The Red Baron was a master. He'd get behind a pilot, and if the pilot dove away, he would rudder his tail. So the airplane wouldn't fly into it, but it would turn, and as it turned, he would fire ahead of the aircraft. And that was a common tactic, but he was a master at it. So for French pilots to actually survive an engagement, they had to get past a week. And in a lot of cases, you know, by the end of your tour, most of your friends were dead or you were dead. The tactics were bombing raids, strafing airfields to try to take out as many enemy aircraft as possible. They both did it to each other, but mostly it was air-to-air combat. Kills could be very common, but to confirm it, they didn't have the technology like we have today. So they literally looked for the wreckage and tried to get a piece of it. Or if it was in friendly territory, they'd get friendly forces to gather it up for them, so they had a confirmed kill.